this will be available on our website. So should you or any of your colleagues wish to listen to a replay of this, it should be available. I'll talk about that later on, probably to be posted within the coming week. So if we could have the agenda chart, please. Should also say too that we will be having a question and answer session at the end of the day or at the end of the session. So please enter questions into the chat, or we'll have an open mic discussion time at the end here as well. So again, so thank you very much for joining us for us to benefit from learning about the insights that the IBM Institute for Business Value has derived from interviews with over 5,000 technology leaders, over 19 industries and 45 locations around the world. These have resulted in the CIO and the CTO studies, two separate studies, but very much interrelated. The 2001 versions were just very recently announced. So we are delighted to be able to share this information with you and to have the authors of both these studies, Gerald and Veena, joining us here as well. So I'll start off with just a very quick introduction of R2I. We'll then move to the actual, more importantly, the results of the CIO and the findings from these studies from Veena and Gerald. We'll then go quickly into some next steps where perhaps R2I would be delighted to assist in where can we go from here. And then again, open forum for a question and answer. Next chart, please. So again, my name is Roger Osmond from R2I, and we're delighted and honored to have with us Veena Pureswaran and Gerald Parham from the Institute of Business Value from IBM. And as I said, Veena was the actual author for the CTO study, Gerald, the author for the CIO study. So it's great to have them personally delivering their findings for us today. Next chart, please. And just very quickly, an introduction, R2I, we are a leader in cloud computing, managed services, data center solutions, digital transformation, and AI. R2I, the R stands for resources, and this really speaks to our deeply skilled and experienced team of technical and pre-sales professionals, everyone really with 25 years plus of experience in our team of over 40 people. That's the R. And then we have our two I's. The first I stands for infrastructure. That's our traditional and core basis for R2I. Server storage, IT infrastructure, server storage, networking, monitoring, management tools of all kinds. That's been our history and our heritage. The second I really talks to where we've evolved, and that's the integration part. So the integration from these base solutions into our R2I public cloud, into our R2I managed services. So that really rounds out R2I in a quick nutshell. Next chart, please. Yeah. Then if so, I was to say exactly who we are. Founded in 2014, based out of Montreal with offices in Toronto and Ottawa, identified through a number of industry recognitions as one of the fastest growing companies within Canada in our space. Customers, certainly historically within Quebec, but also now throughout Canada and into the States. I talked about our highly experienced team. We're over 40, growing close to 50 folks now within our community. 4 data centers, public cloud, as I said, offerings, 2 in the Quebec area that are synchronous to one another, 2 in the Toronto GTA area, synchronous to each other, and then they're async amongst the 2. Highly ISO certified, which makes us a bit unique in our cloud offering, supported by our Canadian manned 724, 365 day a year network operations center out of Montreal. Next chart, please. And in a very quick nutshell, again, surrounding our core of our consulting and professional services really would be our areas of expertise. So as I said, our foundation comes from IT infrastructure. On top of that, layered our IT managed services, our cloud computing offerings, and then really our evolution into digital transformation and application modernization capabilities, and a very specific deep niche in artificial intelligence. So all of these actually, interestingly enough, as we look to the CIO and CTO studies, all play, I think, a very key role in some of these foundational technologies that have been identified by the study in terms of what is important to CIO and CTOs over the coming years. Next chart, please. And then just lastly, as our R2I introduction, we are teamed with really the industry leaders of hardware, software, management software type solutions, virtualization, operating systems and such. And again, deep expertise in these, so can represent a broad range of these solutions to you as we work to help you achieve your business outcomes. And I think that completes my R2I introduction. And with no further ado, would like to pass over to Gerald and Veena for the CIO study review. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Roger, for that introduction. And thank you to the team for inviting us to this presentation. I'm joined here today by my esteemed colleague, Parham. I had the pleasure of working with him last year, sorry, I wish it was last week, on a set of studies, the CTO and CIO studies within the IBM Institute for Business Value. And today we're going to share a broad set of insights from these studies. And we're going to be doing this jointly to give you sort of the big picture of technology leadership. You'll hear some insights that are specifically from the CIO point of view and some from the CTO point of view, but more importantly about how they need to work together for the technology leadership function to be effective. We can go to the next slide. So just to give you some background here, our studies at the Institute for Business Value are very deep rooted in research, and we do both quantitative and qualitative research. And this particular study it's a global study, and it is based on the input of over 5,000 technology leaders serving either in the CIO function or CTO function. And you can see we have a really good representation across countries, across geos, across industries. And that really gives us a means of not just providing a global perspective, but also deep diving into understanding what these insights mean for a particular industry or a particular geo. And individually, these were 2,500 CTOs and CIOs, but collectively, this gives us the largest sample ever studied of the technology leadership. We can go to the next slide. So at the IBV, we have a very long history of studying the C-suite, something that we've been doing for almost 2 decades now. And as you can imagine, roles in the C-suite have evolved, new roles come in. And Jerry here has been studying the CIO role for quite some time, but this actually happens to be our inaugural CTO study. So you'll see as we go through the presentation why that's the case as well. Why did we start studying the CTO? And you'll see as we go through the presentation also why we studied these together, because they are really quite interdependent roles. And for both CTOs and CIOs to be successful, they really need to be working together. So, we hope you'll have an appreciation for that by the end of this presentation as well. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of the research that we're presenting here, as Roger mentioned, there are 2 reports that we published from the IBV late last year. One is a CIO study report titled The CIO Revolution, and the companion CTO report is titled The CTO Revelation. And again, as with everything in our research, there's a reason for these titles. Our research suggested that there really is a paradigm shift in the role that the CTOs are playing. Pivoted by the pandemic and everything else that's going on in terms of technology factors. At the same time, we observed our hypothesis going into this research was that CTOs are making a very noticeable ascent into the C-suite. and that they are becoming more and more influential. So it was very intriguing for us to actually study these roles together. So the way the CIO report is structured is the chapter 1 of the report actually explores the opportunity that CIOs have in this, sort of post-pandemic, if I may say so, era. Chapter 2 and chapter 3 for the CTO and CIO reports are actually quite similar. Chapter 2 explores the value of CTOs and CIOs collaborating together, but the CIO report presents it from the CIO perspective, and likewise, the CTO report presents it from the CTO perspective. Chapter 3 identifies 3 what we describe as leadership mandates, organizational mandates for CTOs and CIOs. And when I say mandates, it's really what is expected of the CTO and CIO roles, based on the organization, the industry, the type of the needs of the organization versus an individual leader's personality or skills. And I think that is something that is, very, very valuable in this report to understand the sort of unique differences in the expectations of CTO and CIO roles, not just between each other, but even within the roles themselves. So that is the structure that the CIO report follows. In the CTO report, in chapter 1, we explore the ascent of the CTO, right? So why has the CTO role become so important, and what is the role they're actually playing in the C-suite? So we hope, again, by the end of this presentation, you have an appreciation for the roles that both CTOs and CIO play and their expanding influence on the C-suite. Next slide, please. So there is a bit of a precedent to the 2 studies that we're talking about today, the CTO and CIO studies. And that is, in fact, our signature CEO study, which was conducted in the early part of last year. So it preceded both pieces of research that we're talking about. And one of the very interesting observations in that research was that CEOs are beginning to recognize the importance of CTOs and CIOs. And together, the technology leadership functions, so CTOs and CIOs together, actually rank 3rd in terms of importance when, in terms of consideration by CEOs. So if you look at the middle column there, the gray column, CFOs ranked number 1, COOs ranked number 2, and the CIOs and CTOs together ranked number 3 in terms of importance by CEOs. So to us, that itself was a statement that we really need to be studying these roles together and really need to bring in the CTO into our study of the C-suite. So it was really a big motivation for us going into our CTO and CIO studies last year. Next slide, please. So what did we find in our data and in our research in terms of the influence of CTOs and CIOs in the C-suite? So some of these insights, we'll try to compare and contrast as we go along, but some of them you'll see, really run quite parallel. Our CIO research suggests that about 2/3 of them report directly into the C-suite. And somewhat surprisingly, about 2/3 of CTOs report directly into the C-suite also. Now, I say somewhat surprisingly for CTOs because the perception of the CTO role is that it tends to be more, product specific or business unit specific, whereas the CIO role has been, longer recognized as a C-suite role. So it is, it was very interesting to us that these, sort of run neck to neck because they are, about 2/3 of both CTOs and CIOs now report directly into the C-suite. In terms of their relationship with the CEO organizationally, you can see, a little more than 1/3 of CIOs actually report that they report directly to the CEO. And a little more than that, about 40% of CTOs report directly to the CEO. So the aspirations of these CTOs and CIOs don't end there. 27% of CIOs actually expect their next role to be a CEO. So they are on a, a really impressive trajectory here. And likewise with CTOs, almost a third of them state their ambitions to make it to CEO. So you can see that this is not, these are not roles that are, specific to just individual offerings or products or business units or geos. These are, very, very strong roles within the C-suite and very important in terms of leadership organizationally. Next slide, please. So we were also trying to understand CIO and CTO's perceptions of themselves and each other. So what we learned was that the top sort of self-descriptor of CIOs was that of a transformational business leader. And you'll see as we go along this presentation, Jerry will show you also why CIOs really are playing this role of transformational business leader, and how honestly they're the most equipped to be able to play this role. On the other hand, the most common self-descriptor that came up for CTOs was that of a technology visionary. And again, you'll see as we present our data in terms of emerging technologies and the stewardship that CTOs play, that this is something that they've sort of taken upon themselves to be sort of the one that is looking with the headlights on and looking ahead in terms of like 5 to 10 years timeline, and really being the visionary driver in the C-suite. Next slide, please.
Oops.
Yeah. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry to talk about, how CTOs and CIOs are actually exerting their influence in very important ways, and then we'll come back to some of the insights.
Okay. Well, thank you, Veena. Thank you, Roger and team, and also thank you, attendees, for your interest in the studies. So as Veena mentioned, the role of CIO and CTO both are undergoing a fundamental shift. We see this reflected in the influence of the technology leadership function, and the fact that influence is mutual. It's both roles gaining in influence. We wanted to, part of the research was we wanted to understand what is the impact of the pandemic and how is that changing the agenda for technology leaders. And what we saw was a really clear pattern that the pandemic was driving a lot of investment and transformation. What you can see on this slide is across a number of different areas, the areas on the right, you can see significant increase in capability maturity over the past 2 years. So led by hybrid cloud operations and digital process automation and what we would describe as intelligent workflows. So basically, those are two areas where if you look, when we asked leaders, where were you in 2019 in terms of your capability maturity, and where were you in 2021? And you can see significant gains in their capability maturity. This suggested to us that the pandemic was really more of almost a culmination of several years of efforts and initiatives in transformation, but also that it was functioning as a watershed moment, as really as a paradigm shift. And we can see that in and we'll see that in a few slides when we look at the trends around hybrid workplace and things like that. So the takeaway is what might have been accomplished over 5, possibly 7 years, really that level of investment in transformation, it was really compressed into 2. And so we're really looking at a sort of before the pandemic, after pandemic kind of reality. And so moving forward for technology leaders, that these capabilities that they've now made these investments in areas like hybrid cloud and digital process automation, these are really going to help influence the technology agenda for the next few years moving forward. And we can see when we look at this slide, this was asked of CTOs. We wanted to understand what's on your horizon in terms of emerging technologies or technologies that'll have the biggest impact on your business. We asked over 2 timeframes, over the short term, over the next 2 to 3 years, and over the longer term, over the following 5 to 10 years. And you can see that cloud is playing a prominent role in the short term, and even in the long term, it's still playing a significant role. And this is, if you look at the nexus of technologies, if around cloud, IoT, advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, 5G, that's really driving a lot of the transformation agenda. And you can see even in the future, some of that mix of technologies is going to be very important for in terms of creating value. I'd like to point out also that we had some research last year, a different study called Digital Acceleration, which you can find on our website. But it had a really interesting finding that cloud really forms the basis for lots of downstream value. So the value you might gain from cloud is, I think it was recognized as an 8% improvement in revenue growth. But all these other things happen just in and of itself from cloud. But all these other things happen because of those cloud investments. So because you've made this investment in cloud, because cloud is your foundation, now you can do all these things with data, with artificial intelligence, with more agile operations. So you're looking at essentially cloud unlocks up to a 13 times improvement in revenue growth. So it's really that foundational technology that's the basis for everything that we want to do moving forward. And so as Veena mentioned, one of the interesting things we wanted to understand when we started the research was, what is it that CIOs do and what is it that CTOs do, and how are they different from each other, and is there any potential for contention or sort of a clashing of the roles, where are they competing with each other? And I think we had at first a sense that there might be some of that, and what we found with the actual results, and what you'll see here, is actually there was a pretty clear distinction between what the roles are doing and how they do focus on different areas and how they really do complement each other. So what you'll see here is a set of responsibilities, and keep in mind this is aggregate data, so it's across industries, it's across and so it's not it's generalized. So any given industry, any given organization, this set of responsibilities would look different. But what this is in the aggregate across over 5,000 responses, what respondents told us, here's where CIOs are focusing. And you can see that, and that's on the left in the purple, and you can see that CIOs tend to focus on a broad set of responsibilities for a wide spectrum of stakeholders. And what we found on the right, which was surprising to me at least at first, was CTOs tended to focus on a very specific set of responsibilities, and there was a great deal of consensus about what those were. They were really focusing on technology strategy, technology operations, technology architecture, and really featuring those and saying everything kind of comes from that. And then you can see a set of responsibilities in the middle where, depending on the organization, depending on the industry, either CIOs or CTOs might take a more prominent role. But the important thing we saw here was the way this looks in terms of a Venn diagram is it really suggested the complementarity of the roles, that there really isn't as much overlap as we thought there might be, and there really is this ability to work together to drive value. And so what we wanted to understand also was, how frequently are CIOs and CTOs interacting with each other? How much are they relying on each other? And so just anecdotally, we know at IBM, our CIO, Catherine Gorini, when she came into the role earlier last year, one of her first decisions was to bring on a CTO as part of her team. So she recognized that, Catherine recognized that part of her success was really having someone who is focusing on the technology strategy, technology architecture, technology operations, and really helping her team look at that in a strategic way. And Catherine mentioned, and I think this is true for many technology leaders, that they're responsible for managing upward several thousand potentially back-end applications and services and making sure those are available. Well, the potential complexity is high, and so this is again an area where CIOs can help focus on certain parts of that in terms of serving stakeholders across the business, and CTOs can help offer a better design approach in terms of taking advantage of what some of these integrations might do and might be, and looking at it from a technology architecture perspective. So here we can see that there is a fair amount of communication back and forth. 41% of CIOs tell us that they're collaborating frequently with CTO counterparts, and 45% of CTOs tell us they're collaborating with CIO counterparts. So this is certainly encouraging, but we think perhaps it could be a bit more. And the reason that we think there's benefits for greater collaboration is here. This to us was a really standout finding, where when we looked at CIOs and CTOs who are collaborating frequently, they were reporting significant improvement in their overall operating margin. So upwards of a 21% improvement in their overall operating margin across the enterprise. So just by virtue of the fact that the CIO and CTO are working closely together, the organization stands to benefit upwards of 20% in terms of operating margin, in terms of efficiency. So significant gains. And what we wanted to just show here was, what does that look like in terms of how CIOs and CTOs might work together, how they might collaborate. And what we settled on was a perspective here. This is aligned to a different piece of thought leadership we have called the virtual enterprise, where you can see there's 6 primary value drivers. And you can see them around the chart here: purpose, people, partnerships, process, innovation, and technology. And really that's the core, that forms the core of the technology strategy. And CIOs tend to focus on 3 of those, the relationships between an intersection between people, process, and technology. And CTOs tend to focus in general on 3 others, on purpose, partnerships, and innovation. So part of the value of the collaboration comes when you bring the leaders together and they're able to help each other. What we found is the technology portfolio is expanding and diversifying to such a great extent and so rapidly that really the leaders need each other to be successful. You really do need each other to say, I'm going to focus on this and you can focus on this, and we come together and we can help each other do more and have a greater reach and a greater impact. And then just the last thing I'll point out here is what's around the circle. As you can see, a data integration and orchestration layer. And I think that really is key to driving value. We can see just that ability to tie all those different parts together. And that's something unique to the technology function, is the ability to tie these parts of the organization together, to offer that almost as a unifying experience where people go to use these back office applications. It's that ability to use data across the organization, across different functional areas, and have that data accrue value as it goes. That's really unique, and it really requires technology leaders to work together to make that possible. So looking at a few areas where we see some specific impact for the technology function. So we'll look at all 6 of those areas I just mentioned on the previous slide. So this one is looking at the people aspect, and we asked CIOs what kinds of investments are they making in hybrid workplace models. And you can see that there is a significant shift to implementing a comprehensive strategy for remote work. So 83% of CIOs told us that was true. They had done that. And that really represents a big opportunity for technology leaders moving forward, is that transition to the hybrid workplace environment where we're going to need collaboration tools, we're going to need chat, we're going to need Slack, we're going to need conferencing tools, things like that. So it's that ability to work together in regardless of where we happen to be. I think that's a key opportunity moving forward. And one surprising thing was only 34% of CIOs told us they could operate in an entirely virtual environment. So not surprising perhaps, because running a business in a virtual environment is a big challenge, but also perhaps an opportunity moving forward that as we invest in our transformation, in our modernization, are there ways to protect our revenue, to protect our margins by working in a remote environment, so that we're not dependent on being based in a specific location. So this is another area where we saw a great deal of value, is just in the move to automation. So you can see these are our median values, and we wanted to know to what extent are these processes automated. And you can see IT was leading the pack more, the greatest degree of automation at approximately 40% of IT processes were automated. And this is a really another area of opportunity for CIOs and CTOs, is that ability, again, working with data and enriched data or additional value-added services, is as we start to work with data and these back-end services, something becomes of greater value as it goes, as it proceeds through the workflow. And here, lastly, we can see here's the impact of data, and this was recognized by both CIOs and CTOs, that they are driving value by activating data via new insights or data integration or data governance. It's that piece of creating value around data, and that's where other leaders within the organization are looking to the technology leadership function, is to say, we've got a lot of data, but we don't know what to do with it. Help us make sense of that. So this is a key opportunity for technology leaders moving forward. And so I'm going to hand back to Veena now, and then we'll come back with some recommendations at the end.
Thanks, Jerry. So just picking up where Jerry left off, we looked at the 6 what we described as the value drivers that the technology leadership can use to drive value across the organization, and the 3 areas that CTOs tend to focus more on were purpose, partnerships, and innovation. So we'll just share some insights across each of those. So when it comes to purpose, so you see the stat here that says, over 40% of the CTOs that we surveyed actually expect technology to have the greatest impact in terms of their sustainability initiatives. If you look at the list in the graph on the right, you see several other things there, like automation, security and risk, product and service innovation, that you might expect to show up on top in terms of where technology can have the greatest impact. But I think it was eye-opening for us to see that sustainability actually topped the list. And this insight was actually featured in the Wall Street Journal in an article based on an interview also of our CIO, Catherine Gorini, in January, because I think we're increasingly observing that the technology leadership recognizes their role, so the really important role that they play in bringing technology to make sustainability, to actually put sustainability to practice. So it was very inspiring for us to see that collectively, actually, CTOs and CIOs, but in particular here, CTOs are sort of having this emphasis on using technology to impact sustainability. Next slide, please. So the next driver is around the area of partnerships, and CTOs tend to be the stewards of their organizations when it comes to expanding their ecosystems, choosing partners, And one of the things that we learned, both from the data here as well as the interviews that we conducted to complement the survey is the choice of these partnerships, right? So CTOs are, not only the ones that are making these partnerships possible, but they are prioritizing partners that have the same values. So it's not just about having the right partners in terms of capabilities and things like that, but it is who are you choosing to be in your ecosystem and your partner, and do they have the same values? And that's also reflected in the quote that you see here, that we're really going from an era of how to an era of who, and that's how CTOs will continue to evolve ecosystem partnerships. Next slide, please. Then in terms of innovation, we studied this in a couple of ways, and the report goes into a lot more detail. But one of the big ideas that came out of IBM Research last year, IBM Research publishes a report, an annual report called the Global Technology Outlook. And given that we were in the middle of the pandemic, it's really inspired by the urgency of science and what the technology outlook needs to be, given where we were at the early part of last year. And this resulted in this notion of accelerated discovery. So what that means is really going back to the basics of the scientific method and using emerging technologies like AI and cloud and quantum to actually accelerate the discovery process. When I say discovery process, it could mean different things to different industries, but essentially, going back to test and experiment and understand, what's working and what's not, and bring those principles back into innovation, enterprise innovation. So we tested that in our survey, and what we found is that CTOs and CIOs, by working together, can actually implement the scientific method and accelerate discovery, using data insights to improve their offerings, to develop clearer value propositions for their technologies, and really use this method of small experiments to validate or invalidate hypotheses and speed up the innovation process. Along these same lines, if you haven't seen already, IBM announced a discovery accelerator in Quebec, which will bring technologies like quantum to really speed up innovation in industries around that area. So we're very excited about that as well. Next slide. And with that, we'll turn it back to Jerry to talk about the mandates for CIOs, and then I will follow again with the mandates for CTOs.
So thanks, Veena. So as Veena mentioned, when we started, one of the key findings was around what is it that organizations are looking to their technology leaders to do? How can they, what is important that a technology leader does within the organization? What are those expectations? And what we found when we looked at the data is we found a clear pattern where we could see three distinct cohorts basically, that we're describing as a leadership mandate. And we could see that, and this is true for CIOs and CTOs, and what we found was 49% of CIOs tended to fit a description we would call the cross-functional facilitator. That's the best way to describe the role, and I'll get into a little more detail about that in a moment. And then an additional 28% of CIOs, they would fit the role, an archetype essentially of a critical operator, and I'll describe what that is and what those responsibilities are in a moment. And then 23% of CIOs, they were functioning as visionary builders, and I'll describe what I mean by that and how that's different than the other two groups. So first, for the cross-functional facilitators, this is almost a majority of CIOs. So 49% of CIOs describe themselves or their responsibilities would fit this archetype, this leadership mandate. And these CIOs, they operate as innovators across functions. So one of the things we heard, a big theme that we heard in our conversations with CIOs was this idea of working across the organization. And that's really a big part of how they drive value is connecting different parts of the organization. And also that's working horizontally, but in some cases it's also working diagonally. So it's also working at different levels of seniority within the organization. As John Gibbs, who's CIO for International Airlines Group, we feature a quote from him in the study where he was talking about working in one conversation. He might be discussing something with a line level operator, somebody who's trying to solve a certain problem or using technology, and then in his next conversation he might be speaking to the CEO. So it's that switching from different contexts very quickly, very rapidly, but also working across the functions. That's really what these CIOs, the cross-functional facilitators, that's really the bread and butter of their role, is that ability to connect across and up and down within the organization. And you can see a set of responsibilities that are typical for these CIOs and where they're spending their time on the right. And for the next leadership mandate, we see a group that we would describe as the critical operators. And so this, in contrast to, and this is approximately 28% of CIOs, and in contrast to the cross-functional facilitators, these CIOs are really actually focusing on a very specific set of functions, so the mission critical functions for their organization, and that's how they drive value. So instead of being a lot of things for a lot of different people, these CIOs tend to have a very specific set of core responsibilities, and they drive value by by enabling these mission critical capabilities. So there tends to be more of a consensus around we will drive value through things like business continuity or workforce enablement, workforce engagement and productivity, supply chain management, things like that. So it's that core set of responsibilities that the organization is looking to their CIO to help deliver. And lastly, the third mandate for CIOs is visionary builders. And what's interesting about this group is they have characteristics of CIOs and CTOs. So and Veena will share her mandates in a moment, and you'll see something similar with her group. The visionary builders are almost like CTOs in disguise. And this was a trend we saw where there tends to be some convergence, both in the titles. So we saw some CIOs and CTOs have sort of a hybrid title, but also in terms of functions. So some technology leaders are combining the roles of CIO and CTO. And so we can see this here in this third group, which represents about 23% of all CIOs, where they're combining the functions of a CIO and a CTO. So I'll go, I think I'm gonna quickly touch on some recommendations we have specific for all CIOs and then specific to each mandate. And then I'll pass back to Veena and she'll touch on the CTO mandates. So here, in terms of recommendations, what we would say for moving forward, what are leading practices for CIOs? We'd say make sure to focus on really double down on the role and the influence of technology. Many CEOs are looking to their technology leaders to help them define a strategy that's a tech-led strategy for the organization. So in the past, where business would lead the technology strategy, we're finding in many cases business and technology strategy are co-evolving, and in some cases for some businesses, some industries, it's actually the technology strategy that's influencing and leading the business strategy. So it's really emphasizing or understanding the importance of technology to the organization and how the organization can use technology to differentiate and grow. And then the second recommendation is leveraging the unique capabilities for the CIO to create value. So some of that is, for example, using data, letting data, helping data, enrich data across different functions, being that interconnector across business functions. And as one CIO described it, helping create a tapestry, which I thought was a really beautiful way to describe this, where you have all these different parts that are coming together, and it's the role of the CIOs often to be the one who can help package that together and move that downstream to deliver value. And then lastly, we wanted to emphasize that role of being a force multiplier. So looking at how people and process and technology come together to create value. And it's that intersection of those areas, and also working with their CTO counterparts. So it's really that, it's that value of those pieces coming together in a unique way, using things like the data integration and orchestration capabilities of the organization to help deliver new value propositions. And then here, just very quickly touching on some of the recommendations for each mandate. So one of the things for cross-functional facilitators for our first leadership mandate is maybe a recommendation we could say is knowing and acknowledging that part of how you create value is working across the organization. It's looking at maybe there's ways to share some of those responsibilities or delegate to help improve your ability to work with different constituencies. So it can be the kind of thing where if you're many things to many people, you might be spread very thin. So that would be a recommendation we would have for cross-functional facilitators. For critical operators, it's really looking at and saying that the organization is relying on you to deliver these capabilities. So work with people who are experts in those areas and build out your ability to work with them to create value. So transforming that sense of mission into a larger purpose. So taking and saying, these are the core capabilities, and what does that mean for us as a whole when we can bring our experts to bear, and we can create value because we know that we have these mission critical capabilities, we can deliver them with a high degree of confidence. And then lastly, for the visionary builders, it's that taking advantage of that wide expansive view where you're bringing a CIO and a CTO perspective together. And so some of that is you very likely have a great deal of influence within your organization by occupying both of those roles or both of those seats at the table. So it's looking and saying, what is the board looking to do from the technology leadership function? How can you have influence at a greater level and just be a champion for the role of technology within the organization? So it's where and also knowing where it is that you can look to other leaders within the organization to enhance the impact of technology. So with that, I'll pass back to Veena, and she'll look at the CTO leadership mandates.
Thank you, Jerry. So looking at CTO roles, so just sort of stepping back to the Venn diagram that Jerry showed a little while ago, one of our big takeaways from that was how homogeneous the CTO role tends to be compared to the CIO roles. CIO roles tend to be broad, encompassing a number of different areas, whereas the CTO role tends to be very, very laser focused, technology strategy, technology architecture, technology operations. But even so, our research suggests that there are these nuances in terms of expectations of CTOs, depending on the organization, the industry, the size of the organization, the mission of the organization. And our research suggests that these mandates for CTOs fall into these three categories that I'm going to talk about. So the biggest category here is that of a technology steward. So this is a very, sort of outward-facing role for the CTO. The second one here is the operational expert, which is, much more within the organization. And then the third role is what we describe as a hybrid hero, which is really, to the point that Jerry made earlier about one of the CIO roles. It is really a CIO in disguise, right? So these are CIOs that have the title of CTO, but really, in practice, play the role of both. Next slide. So the technology stewards, they are the ones who are driving ecosystems, very outward focused, and they tend to bring insights that they learn in that capacity back into the organization. They tend to be really good collaborators and work with their CIO counterparts in terms of both their ecosystem and data strategy. We can go to the next slide. So in contrast, the operational experts are, they're really distinguished by how internally focused they are. They by virtue of being CTOs, they are building forward-looking strategies, but in contrast with the technology stewards, they are doing this from inside out. They are looking at making the most of their technology investments, and not surprisingly, compared to the other two mandates, these operational expert CTOs are the ones that report the greatest return on their technology investments. Next slide, please. And then finally, the hybrid heroes, or the CIOs in disguise, are the ones that do both. So if you look at the responsibilities and the way they invest their time, the columns on the right, these tend to look more like CIOs. And because of that, their role tends to be a little bit more dispersed. They tend to own more areas, and by virtue of their mandate, they also are the ones that report very high collaboration with the CIO. We can go to the next slide. So very broadly, what are our study recommendations for CTOs? One of the things that we learned in terms of CTOs owning the sense of purpose of the organization is that they really are the ones that are modeling responsible leadership. They're actually redefining what responsibility means, whether it's corporate social responsibility, technology responsibility, choices in terms of technology usage, in this notion of responsible computing, conscientious computing, and also creating a more inclusive culture within the organization and across their ecosystems. And again, by virtue of their role, they're the ones that are investing in the future, right? They're the ones that are betting on the emerging technologies. They're the ones that have to be anticipating the right opportunities and applying the scientific method to actually get the greatest benefit and value from those opportunities. And then by virtue of also owning partnerships, or focusing more on partnerships, they're the ones that are, the report in terms of recommendations is, we say to pick partners with the right principles, with values that align with yours and your ecosystem, and use that to grow the competencies of your organization and ecosystem, and to do this creatively. So there are we're obviously trying to do this with the technologies that we have in place and that will emerge over the next 5 to 10 years, but opportunities could also arise in unexpected places and with unexpected partners. Next slide, please. So in terms of the individual mandates, the technology stewards, our recommendation is really to transcend boundaries, right? So we've seen that boundaries can be non-traditional, and we have some recommendations in the report around that for technology stewards. In terms of operational experts, our recommendations are around unlocking new value. So they already tend to be very good at getting good returns on their technology investment, but the idea here is to be deep and selective and be able to unlock new value. And for the hybrid heroes, our recommendations are around similar to CIOs, given where we are, around the hybrid work environment, and really using that to turn that into an opportunity, that the current challenges that we're all in into an opportunity. Next slide. So where do we go from here? So the reports are available for you to read. There's a link that we'll share as well. But in addition to actually downloading and reading the PDF of the reports, we have what we call an experience tool, which is an interactive experience to actually walk through some of the questions that we developed for the survey and be able to get a personalized report of your organization and how that stands relative to others, and your geography, your industry, what benchmarks, what we can benchmark against, and also to provide some very personalized recommendations. So feel free to reach out to Roger and team, and we will be happy to support that process. But this is an extremely valuable follow through besides the report itself. Next slide. And then finally, the link here has is a link to the main IBV page, where you can find the rest of our thought leadership beyond just the reports that we talked here. And there's also a newsletter that you can sign up for to be notified of new studies as they get published. I believe that brings us to the end of the presentation and leaves us just a few minutes for questions.
Oh, well, thank you so very, very much, Veena and Jerry. This is, yeah, it's been some wonderful insights and releasing your findings. We'll just go through a couple of closing slides here. First, I'd like to say that, yeah, you identify the CIO and the CTO. I know a number of many of our Canadian mid-sized organizations may have this represented in a shared person. It may not be technically a C-level role, but I think that the findings in terms of the roles and the responsibilities apply no matter what. I also feel it seems to be very positive news for our technology leaders. The perception of the role that you're identifying from the C-suite shows that we're truly transformational business leaders and providing technology visionaries. And the value to the role, the value to the company is equally important and critical. So I think that's tremendous news for our technology leaders. Just to conclude our perhaps next steps, and then I think we're pretty much ready to end on time. Just a reminder that R2I is here to help you in this journey. I took comfort in the foundational technologies that you identified in the 2 to 3 and also the 5 to 10 year horizons, and really seeing how they very much overlap with our R2I capabilities and solution areas and expertise. So would recommend or would ask that if anyone on the call sees perhaps a way that R2I can engage with you on this journey, we're here to help you. Next chart, please. And then just to restate some of the things that Veena and Jerry had mentioned. Again, there's tremendous value out of the Institute of Business Value. I must say the website is extremely impressive. It has a lot more information. It was referred to that there's the CEO studies and a variety of other studies available as well that you may want to consider for your reference. Obviously, the study itself goes into a lot more depth than this findings summary that we saw today. So please do kind of connect to download a soft copy. Also, you'll be sent a survey, and if you so like, and if you give us your address, we actually have a limited number of hard copies, and these are kind of very excellent little coffee table type books that make for good reading, lots of graphics and interesting charts, and we'd be delighted to send you a copy of both the CIO and CTO hard copy finding, and also there was reference made to the experience or the study experience. We would be delighted to nominate you for that, and perhaps in conjunction with that, do a more customized user case, industry-based findings review as well. So please do reach out to your R2I contacts, and we can take you through that process. And please respond with the survey. And again, just remember, we do need your address information if you want us to mail you the hard copy.